Welcome back to Strange Appalachia, everybody. I'm JD Lawson, and I've got Charlie here as well. But tonight we've got a special guest with us by the name of John Ford. And John is a guy I used to work with at Scout Camp, and he's got a pretty strange story we're going to listen to. So, John, you want to hit it, and we'll go from there?
That sounds like a plan. All right, now, most of y'all don't know me, so let me just let you know that I've been in the woods pretty much my whole life. I grew up deep in the hills of East Tennessee, just roaming the woods. And I've also hunted for a good portion of my life. I've been shooting things since I was old enough to safely handle a firearm. So that's what you need to know going into this. Now, a few years back, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was out hunting with a buddy of mine, and we had a tendency to stay out real late, into the early morning. It was about 1 in the morning, so it's pitch black outside, and we're after coyotes that night because we used to skin them and sell the skins, and so we've got a coyote call, well, a lure, I guess you'd say. It makes it sound like a wounded rabbit, and we've got it down at the foot of this hill. So we're up at the top of this hill with some trees behind us, looking down about 50 yards to the bottom of this hill where we've got this lure set up. And this lure is a little remote control thing, and behind it there's another copse of trees. So it's pitch black outside. You can barely see the silhouette of the tree line. And we're listening, and we'll every now and then send out the signal to make the call happen. And we start hearing a pack of coyotes a good ways off in the distance. So we're listening, waiting for them to get close enough to us. And when they get closer and closer, and they get to where they're about 100, 150 yards away from hearing them, and they start going at it with something. Like, it's not the normal coyote noise, if you're familiar with that, the kind of yipping that they do. It's like snarling and scratching and it's fighting noises. It sounds like they've got into something nasty. And after a couple seconds of this, we start hearing the coyotes hightailing it directly away from us. And they are going at a respectable clip at this point. And after they've faded out and they've gone far enough away that they're not in the general area anymore, our attention is fixed in the direction that was, because we're afraid that's something mean will get us. So we're looking there at that copse of trees at that foot of the hill, and we see lift up out of the tree line a real big dark shape. And I hate that I can't be more descriptive than this, but it was pitch black outside. We could only see it by the silhouette against the still dark sky. But from what we could tell, it was large. It had wings of some sort, and it had a wingspan of about 15 feet. And when it rose up, it let out a scream that I have not heard before or since, but it had the quality of infrasound to it. I don't know if you're familiar with infrasound, the concept of sound that you feel almost as much as you hear.
Like bass.
Yeah, kind of like that, but even lower, like a lesser hertz level. Like when a tiger growls. You've ever been to the zoo and you hear a tiger growl and you kind of feel it in your gut just as much as you hear it. It was that same kind of, you feel it in your gut as much as you hear it, but it was a high-pitched scream on top of that. So it pops up and it lets out that kind of noise. And it's got eyes that are glowing red sounds better, but if we're being honest, it's like reflective red. Like when you shine a light at a raccoon in the night, and it gets that silvery reflection to it, except tinted red. Right. So we see that, and we immediately freeze. Like, we weren't moving much before. but we're stock still at this point because this does not look like something that is within our wheelhouse as normal woodsmen of East Tennessee. And it starts flying towards us. And when it flaps its wings, and it's definitely flapping its wings, it doesn't sound like a feathery kind of wing flap where it kind of swooshes. It's got a quality to it that's leathery, kind of like when you crack a whip, it hisses through the air and there's a snap sound to it. It sounds, for all intents and purposes, like a huge bat. And it starts flying towards us. Now, we're generally pretty quick thinkers, and we've been hunting forever, and we've been shooting for longer than we've been hunting. So we both stand up and start shooting at this thing that's flying towards us. And I had an SKS, and he had an AR-15 at the time, but both of us have a 20-round magazine, and we're both decent shots. And we both empty a magazine into this 15-foot wingspan shape flying towards us, and doesn't slow it down at all. So we, you start pulling the trigger and it starts clicking, and we just drop our guns where we're at and we run because we are freaked out by this thing. So we run all the way back to his house, and we get inside, slam the door, lean up against it, and we just wait in that position till the dawn. So it's about 6 in the morning, the light starts coming out, and we go out there because we're wanting to get our guns. We don't want them to stumble across that and take them. And we're also kind of curious to look around and see if we can figure out what the hell that thing was. So we get there and we find our guns. We get our guns and the magazines, pick up our brass because he was reloading at the time. And we walk into the trees that were behind our position, start looking around, see if we can see any traces of it. There's nothing. There's no broken tree limbs. There's no disturbed leaves. There's no blood, fuzz, skin, nothing. So we decided we're going to walk down to the copse of trees that it came from, see if we can see something from there. So we walk down there and we're looking, and there's a fair bit of broken trees and branches and stuff there from the, fire that was going down range. But there's no fuzz, no skin, no blood, no scratch marks, nothing that could tell us what this thing was or why it was there, where it came from. And, to this day, that's just the end of it. We have no idea what it was, and just makes you a little bit more wary when you're out in the woods now.
Yeah, I can imagine something like that, swooping down on top of you.
Mm-hmm.
Not something that you usually see or would even expect to see. So, is there any military bases nearby that you know of?
Oh, nah, the closest military base.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know. Is there one in East Tennessee? And there's National Guard armories.
McGee
How about-
Tyson.
Yeah.
How about government-owned property? Is there any government-owned property in the area?
Well, there's Oak Ridge, but that's like a couple hours drive away from. Well, I guess it's probably an hour and a half drive from there. And other than that, no, not really.
Yeah, the one thing about flying cryptids in the Appalachian Mountains is we actually do have a history of those things. And the most common one, or the most, I guess, popular one, would be the Mothman. And the description you gave is a description of what was given for the Mothman. Something large. Could you tell if it had a head? Was it humanoid or was it more bird-like, I guess?
I couldn't really tell because it was so dark and quick. Like the whole thing from start to finish, from hearing the coyotes get in with that thing to us being gone, lasted maybe 45 seconds. I've run into the Mothman thing before because, like you guys, I've got a pretty decent interest in the cryptids and such. But I don't feel like that fits as much because of but really honestly because of the leathery aspect to it. That just sticks in my mind.
Yeah, and my take on the Mothman, I believe that it's been debunked. Actually, Soldier of Fortune magazine came out with an article about the Mothman where they'd interviewed a halo jumper who said that they were using that TNT area where the Mothman supposedly originated as a halo drop. And he actually was one of the guys that buzzed the car that night. And the thing that, yeah. And so, he says that, basically I'm the guy that buzzed the car. And the reason they saw red eyes is on the front of our jackets, we used luminescent paint, white on the front, red on the back. And that way the man behind you could tell whether you were moving forwards or backwards.
Right.
And so he basically swooped the car and they thought it was a Mothman or a big bird is how it was originally described.
Yeah, because this is like in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
So we weren't as familiar with the concept of like halo jumpers yet.
Yeah. And so the cool thing about it is, or one of the funny things about it is they said that once that got reported to the media, they immediately quit testing over the area because they knew that the Russians would pick up on it. And the Russians would figure out what's going on and would know that we were testing something in that TNT area. And he said apparently in the article it talks about how they use military bases or old property that the government owns to test things like that. They may have in this case, a TNT factory that's been set up for, World War II that nobody's been in for, 40 years.
Right.
They'll go in and use it for testing. But Appalachian Mountains definitely has a history of cryptids. That Mothman is the most common one that you run into, but there's also giant birds are seen everywhere. You have the Thunderbird legend, of course, the Native American legend, and that's not unheard of in the area. But yeah, there's a lot of flying cryptids that are seen in the area. There's one in Kentucky about a giant Batman, like a bat demon. That's what they call it. That comes up out of a mine, a coal mine.
Really?
Yeah.
On that same note, have you or I guess anybody you've ever talked to ever heard of anything like that in the area, or is that pretty much a one-time thing from your experience?
Well, pretty much a one-time thing from my experience. Most of the people I spend time around are of the alcoholic persuasion. So you kind of got to take their stories with a grain of salt. So I don't really listen much to their backwoods stories because sometimes they're a little iffy. So I've never really heard anybody else talk much about that one in particular. Okay. I wish I could point you to the fella that was with me that night, but unless you got a Ouija board, we're not talking to him. He took his life a couple years back, and
gosh,
yeah.
That's not good.
So this was in the sort of general area of Morristown, right?
Yeah, out towards Whitesburg, but which town.
Yeah, I did some digging in the area, going through stuff, and I couldn't find anything of a specific cryptid in the area that matches that. There's a lot of Bigfoot sightings in the area, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, considering it's a wooded area.
Actually, now that I think about it, and this just occurred to me, there is a government property in Morristown, about a couple miles from where this took place, called Friar's Cave. It's an old bomb shelter they built, and they'd stocked up. There's still a huge steel door across the entrance to the cave. But I don't know if that helps or anything.
Well, do you know how large is that property? Any idea? I mean, is it 15 acres or 1,500 acres? Because that's would make a big difference there.
Well, the surface is not huge. They actually built it on another man's property. Like they own like the acre around the entrance to it. Yeah. But the tunnel complex within it is immense because it feeds into East Tennessee's limestone caves, and they all connect.
Right. Yeah, it's that we talked about last week, that karst topography.
Exactly.
That's a pretty interesting story. I know JD's got an area out there that we can go investigate that's close by. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to get out there at least one night, probably two, and do an investigation to see if we can find anything.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's fun. If you're going to Friar's Cave, be real careful. I've been in once or twice, and you get to a point where there's a gap in the floor, and you can see that the bunker kind of, the supplied area continues on, but there's about a 15-foot jump that you have to cross. And I've never crossed it because the hole that's in front of you between you and continuing on goes so damn deep that you're not getting out of it if you fall in. So be real careful when you go out there.
Yeah, well, my days of going through stuff like that are over. I'm too old for it now, but to go out and look for the cryptid would be what I would want to do. Yeah, it's an awesome story, man. I'm glad you shared it with us. So I'm gonna go through the standard.
On a quick note there, roughly how long ago was this encounter?
Oh, it's been every bit of 6 years.
All right.
We're gonna go through the standard questions now. Any chance it was a bird like a blue herring or a great horned owl?
I'm not going to say no because I just don't know enough. I didn't see it well enough. In my experience, there aren't tons of birds around here with a 15-foot wingspan. But I also am willing to admit that it freaked me the hell out that night. So my memory of it could be exaggerated.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, your description of the leathery wings sort of steers away from a feathered organism of any kind. So
that was my thought.
But like you said, being in a heightened state of fear can mess with you somewhat. But
yeah.
Well, I kind of lean away from that because of unloading the shells into it.
Mm-hmm.
Typically animals aren't born bulletproof. So
yeah,
and that's what the real sticking point is. That sure, we may not have had more than like a 90% accuracy rate, but 90% of 40 shells is still enough to put down basically anything.
Yeah. Especially anything that flies.
Yeah, right? Poking holes in important stuff.
Another question off that there. When you went back the next day, did you see any evidence of the coyotes fight with the whatever it is?
I can't say that I did. Although it's entirely possible that the fight with the coyotes took place further on into the trees than where we went, because we weren't really thinking about that at the time.
Right. It's understandable.
And
cool story. Definitely a cool story. If we get out there where JD's talking about going for us to investigate, you'd be welcome to go with us if you wanted to go.
Well, that'd be awesome. If the schedules line up, I'd love to do that with you.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Like I said, if nothing else, it'd be a good night of camping. At least one night, maybe two. So
right.
Cool. We'll look into that since you're the one that saw the thing. You would be the I guess expert on it.
Not that you could be title.
Not that you could be an expert in 30 seconds of shooting at something, but
yeah, if that was the case, I'd be an expert in a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Charlie, you got any more questions?
That's about it, man. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't any animals, that you could identify.
And to John's credit here, I will vouch for him. I've been in the woods with him several times camping, and he is not gonna, misidentify an owl or a herring.
I mean,
so
I was
I
in
will
college
vouch for him there.
for like 6 years.
Yeah, he's definitely an outdoorsy type of guy. So that's not a mistake that I would see him making easily. So I'll step up and vouch for him there. All right. Well, Charlie, if you don't have any more questions, I don't have any. John, thank you for sharing your story with us. We appreciate it. And I guess to all you listeners out there, I will sign off and see you next week.
Yep, we'll be here Sunday night, hopefully.